And now we're going to hear from some of my favorite people to work with because they came to me with this crazy idea of what if we get the local government to support the spay neuter training and we get all these different organizations involved, we get these different vet clinics involved, we have multiple stakeholders in making it successful. Will you work with us? And I said, heck yeah, I'll work with you. Let's do this thing. And so I have just been able to work with these folks for, I think, is it 1 to 2 years now, helping them just whatever little way I do. They're the ones that's doing the heavy lifting, making things happen. So without further ado, thanks again for everyone for tuning into our session. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers here and then let them take it away. So we are all gathered here to learn more about accelerating spay-neuter impact through public-private collaboration, a case study from DeKalb County, Georgia. And here to talk to us today is Commissioner Michelle Long Spears. Commissioner Spears is a lifelong advocate for community, equity, and environmental stewardship. Raised in the American South, she turned humble beginnings into purpose-driven career and service. Starting at the YMCA and later founding NP Voice, a consulting firm dedicated to advancing social impact through collaboration and resource development. In 2022, Michelle was elected District 2 Commissioner on the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners and currently serves as presiding officer. Her legislative work focuses on key issues including housing, health and human services, animal well-being, and conservation. She holds degrees in sociology, communications, business, and public policy, and is a proud graduate of several regional leadership programs. Michelle lives in Brookhaven with her husband, bonus children, and their beloved pets. Thank you so much to Commissioner Spears. All right, and then we also have joining us Peggy McCarthy. Peggy is a volunteer board director for the Georgia Pet Coalition, an organization which lobbies for state and local animal protection policies. In this capacity, she has helped with the passage of 2 state laws addressing the veterinary shortage in the nonprofit sector and 1 state law prohibiting the transient sales of pets in unregulated outdoor locations. Since 2018, Peggy has been involved with the passage of numerous local ordinances as well as initiatives related to increasing access to affordable spay-neuter, including the United Spay Alliance's first canine high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter training for vets. And also shout out, Peggy is a member of our state leader network representing Georgia with the Georgia Pet Coalition. We have 2 state leaders for Georgia, and we're very glad to have Peggy and the Georgia Pet Coalition on board. And then our final speaker is Lisa. Lisa Milet is the Director of Animal Welfare for the state of Vermont. Previously, she was the Annie and Zach Stanton Distinguished Professor of Canine Welfare Law at the University of Georgia. Lisa is also a board member for Athens Pets, a 501c3 organization based in Athens, Georgia, that she founded and for which served as executive director from 2015 to 2025. Okay, y'all are very impressive people. I'm very excited for this session. I'm turning things over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Bree. I really appreciate you inviting us here today. I think that Peggy, Michelle, and I have worked together really well on coming up with ways to blend the strengths of the passions and strengths of the private individuals and organizations with the public leadership. And so we wanted to talk through the program we set up in DeKalb. I'm going to be talking more about the background initially and the theory behind what we were doing. Michelle's going to cover working with local legislators on making things like this happen for animals in your area. And Peggy is going to go through more of the nuts and bolts from the actual implementation of what we did in DeKalb. So as an initial matter, I want to talk a little bit about what pet overproduction is, because there is some I've heard some things in the animal welfare realm of, oh, there's no problem with overproduction, there's no overpopulation. So I just want to address that very briefly. I want to look at how we can measure it. It can be hard to measure because this is something that goes on in a very diffuse way, but using statistics from public reporting in Georgia, I want to get to the way that at least we've thought about trying to measure how much overproduction there is. Why does it happen? What can we do about it, which is the really critical part. And then if we're thinking about targeted spay neuter, what does effective targeting look like? So what is pet overproduction? And I think we all know that pet overproduction is present if we've got large numbers of litters of puppies and kittens being impounded by our local shelters. And in Georgia, we do have municipal shelters. That's something that's very different in Vermont, where I am now, where there is not a series of public shelters, but there are private humane societies. In either case, where you have large numbers of puppies and kittens being impounded by shelters, I think it's pretty obvious to say, oh, we've got some overproduction if they're not getting snapped up immediately, if there aren't homes ready and willing, waiting for them when they're ready. But to me, it's broader than that. And it also includes the puppies or kittens that might grow up in a home. They get to be teenagers, and then they start overfilling the home. It's not a place where they can stay long term. It might be ones where there's just a large amount of unregulated breeding going on in the home. And this is two of the dogs that came in from a hoarding situation to the shelter in Georgia. It just looks like the animals that come in when they're 2, 3 years old and they languish in the shelter. That's part of overproduction. If there's not lifelong homes that are happy and willing to care for them, then we've produced too many of them. And then, of course, it applies to cats as well. And I think this is important because there's some thinking that there's no real overproduction because we could always place more puppies and kittens. We could always place more, let's say, small dogs. We can transport them to other areas of the country. So we're not actually producing too many. But for me, it's about whether or not there are homes that are willing and able to care for them throughout their lifespan, not just at that initial moment of adoption. And it doesn't have to be the same home. I personally like adopting adult dogs. I don't want a dog younger than about 2 or 3 coming into my home. So I'm happy there's a secondary market for dogs that uh, that that need a home later on. But I think that we have to think about it through the lifespan, not just at the moment of birth and whether or not they have people who are adopting them immediately. So how do we measure this? And Georgia has really good public reporting. The Georgia Department of Agriculture requires that municipal shelters and private shelters with municipal contracts report monthly to it. And so we can look at how many impounds do we have coming into the shelter. And between 2021, and that's the first full year of data we have from Georgia, the requirement of reporting just started July 1st of 2020. So we don't, that's our first start of our first full year of data. And we all know that 2021 was kind of an odd year in the shelter world because we were still fairly empty from the COVID shutdowns. And so at that point, we had about 87,000 dogs come into municipal shelters in Georgia in 2021. That went up by 5,000 in 2022, another 5,000 in 2023, and slightly more in 2024. The problem is that the shelters were already really full by the end of 2022, and we kept adding in more animals. This year, 2025, it looks like the number has dropped down some on impounds, and there's a variety of reasons that we could think through about it. But as a starting matter, we're having more than 90,000 dogs come into our shelters just in Georgia alone in a year, and that's a lot of dogs. Some of the considerations anytime we're playing around with data, though, are who is reporting it. So in the case of the Georgia shelters, in theory, all municipal shelters are reporting, but we don't see that. We actually see where there were 151 or 152 shelters reporting in 2021, 2022, 2023. The number of shelters actually reporting their data has gone down significantly so that we are down to, in 2025, we have about 127 shelters that are reporting their data. So it's not that 25 shelters closed, it's that shelters stopped reporting. And we know from human behavioral research, generally people stop reporting things when they're not going to have good information to report. So all this looks like we've gone down in impounds. One thing to keep in mind is we have many fewer shelters reporting now. And so that number doesn't reflect everyone. Next question is how accurate is the data? And I'm definitely not picking on DeKalb County here, but somebody clearly made a typo when they were putting in data for DeKalb County for September 1st of 2022, where they recorded there were 41,219 dogs impounded as strays that month. And that's just a typo. Somebody just mistyped it. But if you go through and you just add up columns, suddenly you get this huge number. You'd think that we impounded 130,000 dogs in 2022, which just isn't the case. And so there's going to be a lot of errors in data that we're not going to be able to pick up on. We're not going to be able to see as readily as that one. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that any numbers that we're looking at are going to be wrong in some way. It's just the question whether or not it's systemically wrong or whether or not they're just little errors that might cancel each other out. And then also, what do we not see when we're looking at the data? So one of the things I did in Athens, Clarke County was to look at the geography of where we were getting intakes in the shelter from. This is a map of Athens, Clarke County, Georgia. The green sections reflect the social vulnerability index rating of the various census tracts in Athens. The circles represent where we were getting clusters of dogs impounded at the shelter from. Red represents disproportionately high numbers of clusters of dogs coming in. Blue, you can see in some areas, represents disproportionately low. So what we don't see in the data, though, when we just have this aggregate data from someplace like the Georgia Department of Agriculture, is where are we getting the animals from? And even in this map that you're looking at, one of the things we broke down, we ended up breaking down, was where are we getting disproportionate impounds of juvenile dogs at the shelter from? Because that's even more interesting than where are we getting dogs generally, because that's where spay neuter is going to help. If we go to the places where we're getting disproportionate numbers of juvenile dogs coming into the shelter, those are people who aren't breeding for profit or who are realizing they're not making a profit. They're going to say yes to a free spay neuter offer. So I want to know where those disproportionate clusters are. We also don't see the age of the animals coming in a lot of the data that gets reported. I want to know where there's once again, disproportionate clusters of juveniles coming in, because those are litters that their owners are probably going to say yes to a free spay neuter offer very quickly. And so I need to identify where are they. And unfortunately, with the data that we have available, in Georgia, at least, that's not what's being produced. I know Shelter Animals Counts does collect information about the age of the animals being impounded. The problem with that is just many fewer reporting shelters, since that's not mandatory reporting. And so, for example, their numbers for Georgia show, I believe, I don't even remember. I looked at the comparison. Anyway, it's tens of thousands of animals fewer impounded, simply because they have many fewer shelters reporting. But there's not a systemic way in which, oh, this, we can say every state is off by this percent, so we can look at it, understand the data. Instead, it's just that some shelters report and some do not. So here we've got good data in a place like Georgia about how many animals are coming in and what's happening to them, but we don't really understand what those animals look like or where in particular they might be coming from. And in fact, there's some underreporting, and there are always errors. So in Georgia with the dogs, and I focus on dogs when I look at the data, when I talk about municipal shelters, because the cat data is just a lot messier. It's messier because it's messier in that a lot of shelters don't take in cats, and so the data just isn't as reflective of what's going on. But we can see in Georgia that with the Georgia municipal shelters, we were bringing in large numbers of dogs. We actually have about 70,000 a year that get out of the municipal shelters to live outcomes. And that's really independent of how many came in. We said that we had about 80, what was it, about we're about 83,000 in 2021. We're up to 95,000 in 2024, but you'll see that the number getting out through live releases stays pretty much the same. We've saturated our adoption market, and we're not really getting more dogs out, even if more come in. Um, Instead, it's the negative incomes, if we look down here, that is increasing as we put more animals into the shelter. And we are building up more and more animals in the shelters themselves. We're warehousing more animals. We're holding more there beyond the capacity to care in many instances for shelters. So in Georgia, we have all this information, which is great, and we can look at these trends, but there's still a question of why are we having all this overproduction, and what can we do about it? And so one of the things that we have that is leading to this overproduction is there are real informational constraints about production, in that there are no databases that tell us how many dogs and cats are being produced a year, who's producing them, and what's happening to them. There's no breeder database. And by breeder, I don't mean I'm not just talking about the, good breeders. I'm not talking about the puppy mills. I'm not talking about any sort of formal breeding. I just mean breeding in general. And that includes inadvertent breeding. There's just not good information about it. And if we don't have good information about it, we don't know how much is occurring, and we don't know how to control it very well. There's also a mismatch between who pays for the excess animals and and who gets the benefits of excess production. So, for example, if somebody who is breeding dogs and selling them is able to sell all of their puppies, but the puppies end up getting returned, let's say a couple months later, they get returned frequently to that municipal shelter. So the taxpayers are paying the cost of return, whereas the breeder internalized the costs of production. They got the initial sales fee. And so that mismatch means we're going to have overproduction because it's going to be in the seller's best interest to produce as many as possible, and they don't have to deal with the fact that there are returns down the road. There's also a lot of informational confusion about spay neuter, and that's something I think all of us in this area can help with. There's been a lot of publicity to some studies in the last couple of years talking about the increased risk of certain low likelihood cancers or non-fatal conditions as a result of juvenile spay and neuter. So there might be an increase of osteosarcomas with early spay neuter. Some studies might have shown that. The problem is that the public's not really good at grasping the difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And when we talk about increasing the risk of these things through an early spay or neuter, what we're ignoring is the very high likelihood also fatal conditions like mammary cancers that are likely to occur if you don't do the juvenile spay. And so there's a lot of publicity out there right now about the negatives of early spay neuter, and there's not the same sort of effort towards communicating the positives of early spay neuter, or even the fact that the animals that are spayed and neutered have significantly longer lifespans on average than those that don't. There's also changing conditions given a long time horizon. Overproduction happens because I might have the capacity to take a puppy in today, but I don't have the capacity to have it for the next 10 years. Things change, go through my life, and so it's hard to plan today for the right number of animals when there's going to be a lot of variabilities between today and when that animal dies naturally. And so those sort of changing time horizon, that long time horizon means that changes reverberate long down the road. So getting the production right can be problematic. And then there's also a lot of barriers to spay neuter. So what can we do? And first of all, with the informational constraints about production, litter registries are a great way to help with this. So have anyone who is not a licensed breeder have to give notice of the fact that they've produced a litter, just so that you know that that litter is there. It also takes care of the problems with the de minimis exemptions from breeding regulations, that every state that has breeding regulations has de minimis exemptions. You don't need to be registered as a breeder if you only produce 1 or 2 litters. The problem is everybody, in the absence of any way of recording that this is somebody's 1 litter or 2 litters, it can be really hard to ever enforce those sorts of restrictions. And Michelle's going to talk, I think, briefly about the effort in DeKalb County to get a litter registry in place, one that's transparent to members of the public. The mismatch between the cost of excess production and who pays those costs. States could have insurance requirements. If you are breeding and selling animals, the larger breeders might need to have some amount of insurance coverage, not just to cover things like sick animals or bites, but to cover the risk they present to the population by producing a large number of animals and potentially then having to be bailed out at taxpayer cost. There's also income and sales tax gaps. A lot of times these folks who are in cash economies are not paying their income taxes or collecting sales tax. All of that can help get the money together that's needed in order to pay for the excess production. For changing conditions, given a long time horizon, support for owners, especially where they're homeowners, can be really helpful. It's harder to support a renter who is having difficulties keeping an animal because short of buying a house, we frequently cannot stabilize that renter in a way that allows them to keep their pet if the landlord is saying no pets. A homeowner resources can help a lot with, but a renter, those resources are much harder for, but in order to deal with that long time horizon, having those resources available for homeowners who are pet owners can help a lot. With respect to the informational constraints on about spay and neuter, we want to improve the communication to the public about when and why to spay and neuter their pets, and talk about relative risk. Talk about the fact that if a female dog goes through a single heat cycle, her risk of mammary cancer goes up by 8%. If she goes through 2 heat cycles, it goes up by 23%. These are really large increases in something that is a common cancer and is also terminal. Now, of course, there's interventions. You can always have mammary tumors removed, but a lot of times when we're talking about folks who are that we're reaching out to with spay neuter programs, they don't have the money for the sort of monitoring and then treatments that would be necessary to deal with mammary cancer in a dog. But we can talk about these sort of relative risks and the fact that there are actually very real health benefits that come along with being spayed and neutered in many instances. Then finally, there's the barriers to spay neuter, and it means that we need a constellation of options that can happen in a relatively short amount of time to overcome that. So, for example, we want a range of price points for surgeries. So there's some folks who absolutely need a free surgery, and I think those should be available in every community if you can come up with a way to do it. But you also want low cost options because there are some people who can pay for a low cost surgery, and you want them to be able to put in those funds and cover the cost of that surgery if they have it. And so prioritizing all shelter surgeries, for example, at a high quality, high volume spay neuter clinic, or just having free programs, but not having those low cost options means that you're having this population that you're not really reaching effectively. Unless, of course, you can pay for free spays and neuters for everyone in your community, but I don't know of any community that can do that. You also want to look at the high quality, high volume spay neuter trainings for existing vets, which Michelle and Peggy will be talking about here, and which United Spay Alliance, of course, is a pioneer with respect to having those one-day trainings, and looking at MASH clinics or on-site or transportation provided clinics, just because one of the big barriers in many places for folks being able to get their pets altered is simply being able to get to a clinic, especially at a time when it's open. A lot of spay neuter clinics are open Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday, with drop off between 8 and 9 in the morning and pick up by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And that sounds an awful lot like a typical work schedule for a lot of people. So unless they can take a day off work in order to do that, they're not going to be accessing the clinic. But having a transportation option where there's maybe a 6 a.m. drop off and they can pick up as late as 7 o'clock at night, that can change the picture dramatically in terms of who is able to access the spays or neuters, or even having special spay days on a Sunday or a day that is not the same typical work week as the Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday that so many clinics are open for. So effective targeting, I am almost out of time, but with effective targeting, you can look at geographic targeting, which is what I did in Athens, Clarke County. In part was I looked at where were we getting disproportionate impounds of juvenile dogs for the shelter. That's the place I want to go door to door and offer free surgeries. It was also, I partnered initially, my first project was partnering with Athens, Clarke County Animal Services. My nonprofit, Athens Pets, put in the money for the surgeries, but we had Animal Services do all of the labor on making the offers. We had animal control officers who would offer free surgeries in the field, and they would sign the animals up directly. If somebody contacted Animal Services, they would, the front desk folks would sign them up for spays and neuters directly on our account. No vouchers, and didn't need to check in with me. Just utilized the fact that Animal Services was already there, was already encountering the people who most needed these services. And so we were having them make the offers rather than me having to come up with people to do redundant labor there. I think the characteristics of who we're getting spayed and neutered, if we're looking at an intensive effort, is really important. So first of all would be community cats. Community cats need to get spayed and neutered. And while you're going to hear me say females are most important in most areas, I will say with community cats, males also need to get in because it's about their health. They're going to get their shots. They're going to be less apt to fight. They're going to be less apt to mark. They're going to be less apt to piss off the neighbors, frankly. And so you're going to have much healthier community cat populations if you get the males in, even though for reproductive purposes, they're not really the focus. You also want to get the sort of female dogs that are producing your excess in your shelter. So medium large female dogs, you want to get them spayed. I don't worry that much about the Maltese that someone contacts me about. If I'm able to fit her in, great, I'll fit her in, but she's not someone I'm going to seek out. And I'm probably not going to spend too much time trying to convince her owner. I'll talk about eclampsia. I'll talk about the risks of pregnancy with a small dog, but I'm going to be focused on the medium large breed dogs that are filling our shelters. And then also the younger ones, younger dogs, younger cats have longer time horizons for reproduction. They have larger and healthier litters. We need to get them in younger rather than waiting until later. Any sort of cats female cats that are owned that go outside definitely need to get in. I target them. I don't worry that much about the male cats that are owned that go outside just because reproductively they don't matter all that much. There's always going to be another male cat there to service whatever female cats are in the area. And so where I'm looking at scarce vet time or looking at scarce money, I'm going to be looking at the female cats that go outside. I think it's really important on a timing point to get the animals in quickly after you've made contact with them. I've found that after 2 weeks, the no-show rate goes up dramatically. So if I talk to someone and schedule an appointment today and I don't have them getting in for their appointment for more than 2 weeks, I know I'm probably going to lose them. And so it's really important to me to be able to get them in within 2 weeks. And then intensity. For best targeting, you want to go into a breeding population and make sure you get the spay rates at least up to 70%. And at 70%, animals stop coming into contact with each other quite so much. So they're going to have less reproductive encounters. And your birth rate will not completely overwhelm what you have in terms of you're going to start losing animals in the population. Your natural attrition will be higher than your reproductive rate. And so at about 70% of the breeding population getting done, you're going to be able to reverse that population growth. So that's all the background on what we were looking at in DeKalb County, and I'm going to let Michelle take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michelle Long-Spears. I'm the presiding officer, District 2 Commissioner for DeKalb County, Georgia. I'd like to thank Bree so much for inviting me to speak, as well as my co-presenters, Peggy and Lisa. And last but not least, to also want to thank both Beth and Karin, who have been a part of this very important conference today. In 2023, I was elected to serve, or excuse me, 2022, elected to serve as a commissioner here in DeKalb County, Georgia. Was so proud, very excited, and certainly over my campaign, I had met with several animal advocates in our communities, just describing the situation on the ground for our furry friends here. In 2023, I took office on January 1st. And just to give a little bit of context about what a commissioner's primary responsibilities are and what we do, our primary responsibilities in DeKalb are around our budget, policy, ordinances, and then appropriations. Then, in addition, we have a wide range of oversight areas, and a few of those are roads, parks, senior services, and of course, animal services. And there's several other areas, sanitation. We certainly don't want a community without that. Water, clean drinking water. I also believe a major function of all people in elected offices are to be advocates for good government, transparency, responsive, and responsible government. In my first year, I was approached by what we call our red shirts, or our DeKalb animal advocates, and they asked, Michelle, could you please be the champion for animals in our community? I have a history of loving animals and also putting some skin in the game, not in this country. Well, I have in this country, but very directly with a country and a nonprofit in Costa Rica around trying to conserve and protect the wildlife in a very precious national park called the Corcovado National Park in the southern part of Costa Rica. So I guess they decided I was the right person to approach. And of course, I was on board out of the gate with doing what I can do to help advocate and also just address the quality of life that our furry friends had been living in DeKalb County for quite some time. In 2024, along with, takes a village to do everything, but along with a lot of folks, including Peggy and also um, our wonderful professor here. And Lisa, we do miss you, but glad that you are happy in Vermont. We hosted our very first State of DeKalb Animals address in April of 2024. Really, that was an opportunity for us to kind of level set, establish a baseline so that we could start with measuring any changes that we had in various data points, and also to really just kind of mobilize our advocates in DeKalb. It was a success. We did target for attendees. We targeted electeds at mostly the local level, but also the state level, as well as other decision makers. We really wanted people to attend the State of DeKalb Animals Address that were decision makers that could move the needle and hopefully help us see some positive change for animal welfare and animal well-being in DeKalb County. That event itself really ended up becoming the genesis for our Save Our DeKalb Animals initiative. Next slide, please. Thank you, Lisa. All right. So our Save Our DeKalb Animals initiative is very near and dear to me. Again, it started out really just kind of thinking about what this could be and what this could look like if we had the right people at the right time who all care about the same thing, kind of driving towards that North Star. So we began working on just establishing the framework for our SOTA, Save Our DeKalb Animals, also State of DeKalb Animals. Thank you, Beth Genga, for doing that for us. Is we wanted to just make sure we were very clear on our purpose, vision, approach, and focus areas. So our purpose was to reduce, or is, and will be, reduce pet overpopulation and shelter overcrowding. I believe that Lisa did a wonderful job just kind of teeing me up to talk about this as it relates to local government and what we can do to help assist and address this issue. Second is our vision. Our vision was to create a sustainable, humane system for animals and residents alike. I believe that as a local elected official, it is incumbent upon us, it is our responsibility to ensure that our animals and our humans can coexist and have a quality, an absolute quality life, that they have all of the pieces and parts to ensure that they're thriving, not just surviving in our community. Third is our approach, and I'm very proud of the approach that we have taken so far. I've been in office for 2 years and nine and a half months now. And we've been very intentional, very targeted about different legislation that we have been advocating for and passed a lot of it, different programs that we have supported, different projects that we think that may not exist yet, but will make a difference here in our community. We're also very data driven. Lisa did a good job of talking about data, but also some of the gaps that we do have in collecting that data. We're doing our best, our office, in partnership with our administration and our partner on the ground, Lifeline Animal Services, as well as Paul's, to begin really collecting some of this data that can help absolutely just paint the picture, a real picture of what it's like with animal services. And I think DeKalb does a good job. Like everything in the world, we can all improve. And then certainly a community focused solution. That approach is very near and dear to me because, like most things, it takes a village. Local government alone cannot fix this. It just can't. We need people. We need our advocates, our volunteers, our experts, our nonprofit leaders and nonprofit workers, our shelter staff, our enforcement folks. And my goodness, that's a hard job. And just so many people. And that really undergirds, I believe, to see a shift in any system are the people, are the collaborations, and are the partnerships on the ground to move the needle. And then lastly, on this side, our focus areas. We have been very focused on identifying what are those hotspot zip codes that are contributing to our shelter intake and animal service calls. So calls related to dogs roaming the streets, bites, and any other number of issues. Next slide, please. We are blessed to have our DeKalb Animal Advisory Boards in DeKalb County, or DeKalb Animal Services Advisory Board. And they created what they call a 5-point plan. So I'll talk through all of these 5 points. And this plan is really the foundation to the work that I have been advocating for and driving in our community. The first is more space. We have been busting at the seams in our shelter, much like other shelters around the country in these urban areas. We committed to a $4.1 million expansion of animal services facility. It'll house 120 dogs and decompression-friendly outdoor spaces. I'm very proud. We're calling it DeKalb's very first pet neighborhood. We are hoping to cut the ribbon on that later this month or next month. But that has certainly been a labor of love, a passion project of mine for quite some time now. And I do want to give a shout out to Zach Williams with the administration and Rebecca with Lifeline to really do a lot of the work on the ground to make this happen. Second is more trained staff with better pay. We have been working in several partnerships around the state around officer training to make sure that they have the tools in their tool belt to address the issues on the ground when they show up at someone's home or they show up to a parking lot and they're trying to sell puppies and they're not allowed to, but they are receiving the training that they need to be successful. Because if they're successful, the animals will get to our shelter or hopefully into a state or a place of permanency sooner. Secondly, is that I believe that we need to pay our shelter staff what they're worth. And so we advocated for our shelter staff and for our enforcement folks to increase their pay. And then in doing so, we ended up being able to increase the budget for our shelter here in DeKalb County so they can take on some of these other programs that will help with, again, seeking permanency and providing resources. And certainly in the interim, hopefully temporary, is a improved quality of life while they're in the shelter. Third is to reduce our court-held animal delays. I don't know if other folks that are participating in this conference have had these court-held, mostly dog issues like we haven't had in DeKalb County. It has been one of the most heartbreaking parts of this work where a dog has been gotten caught up in our legal system and caught up in our courts through no fault or his or her own, and they're stuck at the animal shelter, and it can be years before they get out. I believe that is wholly unacceptable that that even happens in the first place. And so we have really tried to cultivate a relationship with our county attorney and our previous county attorney. Haven't had a chance to really sit down with our new one, who's only been around a short period of time to talk about it further. But our previous county attorney really understood that, it didn't make sense for the animal, but it also doesn't make financial sense for an animal to be withering in the way and away in our shelter. But, for our bottom line folks, at the cost of roughly 35 to 40, but I've heard $38 per day, that just makes no sense. And then I have been cultivating relationships with many of our judges, and we're lucky. A lot of our judges here in DeKalb are animal owners, dogs and cats and snakes and turtles. And a few of them have really been great partners and good, and really do want to see us improve this system. We also did pass a cost of care policy in 2024 and have been kind of working through these cost of care cases. And I'm very proud that our county attorney's office has been much more aggressive. They have been historically around cost of care. Our fourth point is more resources for pet families. The county sponsored high volume, high quality spay neuter wet labs. Again, a shout out to Lifeline and to Beth Ganga for bringing these to us here in DeKalb County. We are so proud to have hosted the very first high quality, high volume spay neuter wet lab in Georgia, I guess for a local government. And then we were the very first in the country to host one for dogs. And it was a really great opportunity to just show our decision makers that if you inject a little creativity, you have some passion to solve this problem, is that you can really find different ways of doing things to address these issues of our animals ending up in our shelter because we haven't invested as deeply as we need to in spay neuter programs. We also did a spayathon earlier this year at two locations in DeKalb County for 2 days. I was able to go on site for both of them, and wow, I was really just blown away by the care, the passion, the love that the volunteers and the staff had around the program itself, and then really just knowing how important it was to get these animals spayed and neutered as expeditiously as we possibly could. And then lastly is that one thing our office has tested in the past, and it was in support of our spayathon, was the text message system for events and resource alerts. And I look forward to utilizing that more often in the future. And our last point on our 5-point plan is around partnerships with local rescues and other organizations. And so we have supported our Healthy Pets program here in DeKalb County. We have also been engaged with other commissioners to lift up and support their programs. We partnered with Commissioner Davis Johnson on a program last year. We are hoping to replicate that program later this year or early next year. And we certainly just show up in spaces to support, to present, to distribute swag, to just be present, to talk about what's actually going on in the county. And I think that our commitment to that has really allowed us to become more visible in this space and set the stage for developing, cultivating, and then strengthening existing relationships in this space. And the last is around boosting outreach and community visibility for rescue partners. I will tell you that in our very first State of DeKalb Animals initiative, we were able to get all 7 of our commissioners in support of that. If you know anything about DeKalb County, that's a very rare thing to do. And this year, we were able to get 6 out of our 7 commissioners to support our State of DeKalb Animals initiative. So I certainly have a lot of pride that my colleagues supported, as well as our Chief Executive Officer, Lorraine Cochran Johnson. But what it also did do, and probably more important than just them saying, yes, we'll support, is they promoted it through their social media. They promoted it through their emails. They talked about it in their community. And again, just getting the word out, getting people to show up, and also just giving people hope that even if it's just something small, that if you do something, it's better than nothing. And it really does take a village to fix this problem. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one thing our office has been very focused on has been advocating for expanding access to affordable spay neuter programs. I did speak a little bit at the previous slide about around that work. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but we have really tried to focus on the pockets of our community where 88% or more of pets remain unaltered. Second is that we have been working with the administration for about a year now on the purchase and then determining how to operate a mobile spay neuter clinic. And so we received some of the funding in 2024, I believe, some of the funding in 2025. It turns out they're expensive. And then once you actually purchase them, you actually have to pay for the people to staff them and to organize where we're going to be on site. And so all of that right now is in process. And I am so excited that I feel like we're getting a lot closer. So I'm hoping in 2026 we can unveil, if you will, this new spay neuter mobile spay neuter clinic that we can start deploying to hot spots in DeKalb County for spay and neutering. Also, we did talk a little bit already about those high quality, high volume trainings for vets and vet techs. That I believe is just absolutely critical to solving the problem in not just our community, but around the country with the overpopulation in the shelter. And I certainly attended the one of the sessions earlier today where they were talking about the super clinics and some of the numbers that were mentioned, 20,000, I believe one place said, really just blew my mind. And then lastly is, again, just really trying to make sure that we're not just randomly picking places. We are relying on the data that is provided to us, trying to target these specific pockets and zip codes around our community that does receive more calls. And I wholeheartedly agree with Lisa. She wasn't picking on DeKalb, but she was really pointing out is that we did have an error in our data that was reported. We're humans, errors do happen. It's okay. But I think that if we could, maybe invest a little bit more into a data-driven approach, perhaps more of a interactive like dashboard, I think we can kind of stay on top of trends and note when we see spikes in certain areas. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Again, through our State of DeKalb Animals address, probably more so this year than last year, even though we did touch on it, we talked a lot about the intersection of public health and public safety and the impacts, though, that the animal well-being and welfare issue has both on health and safety of humans in our community. And so one thing I just wanted to point out is that with having this new outdoor shelter that we're hoping to open very soon, is that my understanding is that really will reduce the disease transmission that our dogs experience. And we call it overflow units. Now we're calling it the pet neighborhood. Is that we really have struggled with, which many shelters have around the country, just with disease getting around us. And the more number of animals get in the shower, get into the shelter, the more that disease transmission does happen and increase. And secondly, is that if we can get a handle of the dogs that are breeding in our communities, just having puppies and kittens on the street, specifically with dogs, is that we can reduce the risk of animal attacks and property damage. And I have heard some devastating stories. I heard one recently about an elderly woman that was attacked in DeKalb County, and just she loved the dog, but attacked her, and unfortunately she was wounded. And that's, I think, again, incumbent upon your local elected officials to recognize that if we can get control of our animal population, we can reduce that happening and that negative health impact to our residents. Next is minimize wildlife habitat disruption and road hazards. We certainly don't want, or I definitely don't want to ever see another dog or cat or deer, honestly, or snake or turtle that's been run over and hit by a car. And I find it heartbreaking every time. And I know that I will never get over it, quite frankly. And then I am really big into conservation. And, we do have some very fragile environments within our parks here in our community. And I think sometimes, in parks, you want to make sure that you do have trails, designated trails, because sometimes when the dogs get off of the trail, they can actually disrupt the environment off of the trails for other animals in that environment. Also, we're talking about the stray animal control, safer, cleaner neighborhoods. We have 770,000 residents. That is a lot of people. We're a very dense community here in DeKalb County. And the way that we handle our animal welfare system is that we have our enforcement piece, which is under DeKalb County government. And then we have our adoptions, fostering programs under a subcontractor, a 501c3 nonprofit, which is Lifeline. And I believe for us to realize a safer, cleaner, more humane neighborhood for both animals and for people is that we need to make sure that we're all invested in these spay and neuter programs. Next slide, please. All righty, I'll move through this quickly. I know it's a Saturday afternoon and many of us are not big numbers people. I'm kind of a number nerd, but and some of this we've already spoke to. So our animal services budget for 2025, the allocation was 11.1 million. That was a 9% increase, and our office was very, very honored to advocate to increase that budget. Second is around new hires. We've continued to advocate for more pay, better digs, quite frankly, a better office for our enforcement staff, and also additional enforcement officers. The mobile spay neuter clinic, I've already spoken to that. There is a substantial expense to that, to just for the capital piece of it, buying the mobile clinic, but also we have to staff it and pay for the operating. But what the impact is, it does expand service reach. Next is around training and benefits. Again, we have been working on increasing pay, training our officers to make sure that they have the tools in their tool belt to deal with any animal related situation that they encounter. And then lastly, public outreach and vouchers. My office has been doing vouchers for community cats, and we look forward to continuing to do so, but certainly working with all of the groups on the ground to make sure that we nip some of these issues in the bud as fast as possible. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So the value to policymakers for our State of DeKalb Animals Initiative, or Save Our DeKalb Animals Initiative, which began from our State of DeKalb Animals Address, are really around 4 different points. First is a fiscally responsible investment, reducing the long-term shelter and enforcement cost for the bottom line folks who don't maybe like animals or really aren't interested in this issue. A lot of those people are interested in how their county government spends their money. So there is that financial responsibility. Second is the public safety initiative. And I have spoke a little bit about that, about reducing the stray related risk and community complaints. We handle a lot of stuff as commissioners, and we get complaints from, my water smells, I have a pothole on my road, and this is yet just another complaint that we get. And again, I think that if we can minimize the strays that are out in our streets and in our neighborhoods, we can minimize those public safety community complaints that we receive on this issue. Also, it's a health equity strategy, is making sure that for every single resident who wants to own an animal, is that we can provide low cost access to them for vaccinations, microchipping, spay, neuter, and whatever services they need. Because you don't have to be wealthy to be a pet owner. I'm not wealthy and I love animals. And I think we have to make it where everybody can have a pet who wants to be a responsible pet owner. And lastly is partnership. I believe that it really does take a village to address and solve this problem. So we have to work with nonprofits, we work with local rescues, we work with our 501c4 animal advocates, as well as the administration of their commission offices, state organizations, our state legislature, national organizations, our National Association of Counties, to really move the needle on this problem. Next slide, please. All right, to wrap up, our path forward is, number one, is we'll continue to track our data and get a handle on the hotspots and areas that we can deploy once we get it, that mobile spay neuter vehicle, and also kind of embrace a place-based approach of bringing whatever the needs are to those hotspots instead of the reverse happening and them having to come to our animal shelter. We have a big county, easily an hour to get from the north side to the south side. The second one is expand community outreach in high need zip codes. And again, we are working with trying to use SMS, so a platform called Ascendant, to implement more text messaging out to constituents, that when we do have like a spayathon, we're able to more easily reach them. Third is building on successful rescue and clinic partnerships. I think our high quality, high volume spay neuter wet lab really is evidence of how a strong partnership can work. And I hope that we can continue to do more of those in the future. And lastly, through our State of DeKalb Animals Address, is that we annually report to policymakers and residents what's working, what hasn't worked. We need to make sure that our next State of DeKalb Animals Address is that we do report out on our litter registry ordinance that was passed earlier this year. Did it work? Did it not work? We're able to report out on transient sales. We're able to bring those number down, and also several other measures as well that we track. Go to the next slide. I believe that does wrap me up. I just want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to me and or let me talk to you about what we have done. And in closing, I just want everybody that is participating or comes back and watches this video, please engage with your local government. It really does make a difference. And it is our responsibility to approach this issue straight on and to address those challenges through a myriad of approaches, whether it's funding, new programs, initiatives, spay neuter, of course, anything that we can to improve the quality of life for our furry friends. Thank you so much, and I will turn it over now to Peggy.
Well, my portion of the presentation was talking about the specific spay neuter initiatives that are being funded directly by DeKalb County. And as part of the proposal that Lisa Milet and I submitted to the Commissioner Spears, we first looked at DeKalb County's canine shelter data to help define the scope of the problem for DeKalb lawmakers and to provide a baseline prior to intervention. In this graph, total canine shelter intake was compared from year 2021 to 2024. And as you can see, the increase in shelter intake was over those years was 36%, which has exceeded the humane carrying capacity of the shelter. Next. And this pie chart shows the relative contribution of each canine intake category for 2024. Strays accounted for 68% of the total intake, with the majority of these animals being unaltered. Next. Tragically, when shelter intake significantly increases while adoptions and transports remain mostly unchanged, euthanasia of healthy adoptable animals increases as well. And between those years, 2021 to 2024, the animal shelter experienced a dramatic increase of 261% of non-live outcomes for dogs. And non-live outcomes include canine died in care, which is the black, canine lost in care, shown in purple, and canine euthanasia, shown in red. Next. And this is simply another way of showing the data to lawmakers. This is the same DeKalb data for non-live outcomes overlaid with the aggregated statewide public shelter data. And you can see DeKalb follows the trend line of the statewide data, but at a much more dramatic rate. Next. And so a question local lawmakers often ask is about the cost effectiveness of preventive spay neuter programs. And one very basic way of presenting this is to look at the average cost per day for dog, is to compare the cost of spay neuter to the cost of impounding and sheltering animals. And then as an example, the average cost per day for dog impounds at DeKalb County is approximately $35, excluding any extra vet care. The average length of stay for dogs impounds, including court cases, was approximately 30 days in 2024. And so you multiply that and you get $1,500, which is much more than a subsidized spay neuter. And in addition, sterilizing animals at a younger age through subsidized spay neuter is cheaper with fewer complications and removes animals with more productive years from the breeding pool. Next. And so the actual spay neuter initiatives, the first one funded by DeKalb County was a high quality, high volume spay neuter training, surgical training for veterinarians using felines. We followed the protocol utilized by United Spay Alliance, their national pilot program for sterilizing shelter cats, which offers the local one-day surgical training. Next. Oh, and I'm sorry, it's important to mention that the high quality, high volume spay neuter is recognized as a best practice by the Georgia Veterinary Medical Association and was advertised as such on the flyers that went out to vets in DeKalb County.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that I think that was huge. Peggy coordinated with the GVMA on this wet lab, and it was a really big thing that they came out to say that, yes, these are best practices. And so I think it's worth coordinating with veterinary medical associations in your states, because the more that they can support this sort of training and spay and neuter, the more successful it's going to be.
Yes, absolutely. Next. And so thanks to funding by Commissioner Long Spears, Georgia's first local high quality, high volume spay neuter feline wet lab was held September of 2024 in DeKalb. It was also the first United Spay Alliance wet lab to be funded, the first ever by a local government. The trainee to instructor ratio was 2-to-1, and here you see the instructor, Dr. Koyman, rotating back and forth as needed between two tables and trainees. A total of 37 shelter cats were sterilized by 4 vet trainees and 2 instructors. This next part's really important. Evaluations of the wet lab by trainees were very positive. One trainee commented that it was the best continuing education class she had ever taken as a veterinarian. Next. The feline wet lab was so successful that Commissioner Long Spears agreed to fund a second wet lab for canines. And so in February 2025, DeKalb County became the first in the nation to fund and offer the United Spay Alliance high quality, high volume spay neuter wet lab for canines. 20 predominantly female shelter dogs were sterilized by 4 trainees and 2 instructors. 3 additional vets were in attendance to observe for potential replication in their communities, including the president of the Association of Shelter Veterinarians. Next. This just shows you the group after the day of canine spays. And success depends on effective collaboration between these public and private entities. And in this group photo, 7 organizations are represented. Next. 2 more high quality, high volume spay neuter wet labs for both felines and canines are scheduled for early 2026 and will be funded once again by DeKalb County. Next. The third initiative was a 2-day free spay-a-thon for dogs and cats held on a Friday and Saturday in May of 2025 and open to residents of DeKalb County. Next. It was important to the Spay-a-thon team that priority registration be given to residents in zip codes that contribute the most to animal control calls and shelter impounds. These zip codes were identified by a heat map created by Commissioner Long Spears' office. It's not surprising that these same zip codes, designated by the darker red colors in South DeKalb, also have some of the lowest income per household in the county. As Commissioner Spears mentioned previously, the more impoverished areas have very low sterilization rates, and the shelters serving those communities receive far too many unwanted animals. Next. And we'll just skip over that. This just shows you all the public-private partners involved in this. Next. Separate flyers were distributed for the 2 clinic locations that were utilized for the spay-a-thon. Residents scanned a QR code on the flyer, which you see in the lower corner, to register, and schedule with a spay neuter coordinator for each clinic. Next. These photos show two of the larger dogs being sterilized during the spayathon. We had a combination of both dogs and cats and all sizes of dogs. We had quite a few large dogs and flat-faced dogs, which take longer for surgery and recovery. Next. 4 more one-day spayathons for both dogs and cats are planned for 2025 and 2026 and will be funded by DeKalb County. Considering that the problematic zip codes represent nearly half of DeKalb's population, continuation of targeted spay neuter will be critical to impacting shelter metrics long-term. The DeKalb County Spayathon is an example of what can be accomplished when a local government invests in preventive strategies for pet population control and engages with nonprofit entities to amplify results. Thank you, Commissioner Long-Spears, for your big, all caps, amazing leadership and support. Next.
All right, so I think that's the end of our presentation, if there are questions.
See, I think that was all very important, Peggy. Thank you so much for
Sorry for
carrying
rushing.
on. No, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to put all of this together because it is, I mean, one of my favorite models to highlight because it shows the potential of what's possible when we all play nice and collaborate and build these relationships. And I know that others have questions about how you got everyone to play so nicely together. And so I think right out of the bat, I think a lot of folks are wondering, how do we get a Commissioner Spears to be in our corner in our county commission, right? Like what is the secret sauce? How did Commissioner Spears, how did you can you explain like the minutia, like how do we appeal to more local governments? Like if you could like give like a top 1 or 2 tips for getting your local county commission, city board or whatever on board, what do you say?
So I will be brief. Obviously, that's a challenge of mine sometimes, especially when I have so much passion, like in this subject. But it's simple. Just ask. I know that sounds almost too simple, but it's not. I think that you just have to recognize that county commissioners, city council members, we're busy. We have potholes to deal with. We have traffic on our roads. We have deer that get hit. You really just have to one, just muster up the courage and the desire to go and approach us, whether that's through email, a text message, in person at an event, and say, hey, we need help. And that's number 1. And second is the red shirts in our community, our animal advocates are a force to be reckoned with. They show up at our meetings and they're red shirts. And when you were sitting up on the dais, you look out and you see a room of 75 red shirts, they're serious. So mobilize, mobilize, mobilize on the ground. And we all want to take care of our furry friends, but it's a squeaky wheel thing in county government.
Absolutely. And would you say that the data and numbers is more important than necessarily the fuzzy animal stories?
I think to me, data just complements the story. I believe that data is very important. But I think really and truly is that you want to move the individual, whether you're talking about pets or something else that interests you, and you want them to see your vision that we can do it better in blank community. Put your community in there. And in order to do it better, we have to work together. And again, I really believe there is power in partnerships, partnerships, and partnerships. But again, you've got to ask the question. You have to take the time to cultivate the relationships. And this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. You've got to, hold on tight and know that you might get told no, but it's never, if you know me, nothing's ever no. It's just maybe or not now. Eventually it's always a yes. So adopt that mentality and who knows, you can move mountains.
I like that. Not
And I
now.
think it matters very much who you elect. And you need to help animals at the ballot box.
Great point. Yes, absolutely. Our animal advocates actually do a scorecard on our local electeds, which I thought was a brilliant idea, truly.
That's very cool. All right, so some other questions. You have one person that potentially interested in moving and working in DeKalb County. So I would advise that person to reach out to the email addresses you see on your screen for a little bit more detailed information on what it's like to work for the DeKalb shelters. All right, let's see. I guess I'm wondering, I mean, now that you're kind of midway through, right? You still have a lot more that you guys want to do, but kind of looking back to where you started with all of this and these different paths that you're taking now, is there anything like you wish you would have known then that you know now as you have gone about this work?
That is a great question. I will be honest. It would have been nice to have Beth Ganga in my office sooner. She joined me in October of 2023. She really has brought so much to the table and a lot of these really cool programs. But also, it would have been nice to be able to have walked into a cohesive network. But that wasn't, at least from my perspective, it wasn't what it was. And so I think having Peggy and Lisa and Beth and Karen and so many other folks just willing to step up and educate me and take the time and hold my hand and let me ask those really dumb questions was invaluable. Just letting me be real, because, again, this is not the only thing you do as a county commissioner, but what I really ended up finding out is how it impacts so many parts of our community. Again, we talked about public health, public safety. I also think public education, teaching children about and adults, quite frankly, about responsible pet ownership is important. I think that we have started to lay the groundwork for other electeds to have almost like a playbook, if you will, that if you're interested in pursuing this initiative moving forward in your community, these are some of the things that you can do in order to realize success.
That's very helpful. All right, y'all. I wanted to know too, if you ever imagined when you were starting down this path, if what the ripple effect would be through the state of Georgia. And do you know that there is a ripple effect? Are you guys aware of that?
Yes.
Well, Peggy, why don't you answer that question? Because you're at the state level and you have a bigger lens than I do.
Well, I do think it speaks to how just building some professional relationships, respectful, polite, professional relationships with lawmakers, whether it's local or state, and their staff, just yields so much in the long term. And when I go in to see local lawmakers or even state lawmakers and even federal, I'm not there to attack somebody. I'm there to attack the problem. I'm there to provide solutions. And what I like to do is reach out to as many subject matter experts. I'm not a subject matter expert. I reach out to people like Lisa. Lisa has been invaluable to what I do, and then to just build these polite relationships instead of attacking online or in meetings, and to provide solutions. Not just stories are very important. Data is very important. You also have to bring solutions. I like to make sure that lawmakers leave after a meeting, they leave better educated about a topic. I want to bring them the necessary information, and that often comes from the subject matter experts and various organizations.
So Peggy and I have spoken with both officials and advocates in a couple other places in Georgia about a package similar to what DeKalb County has adopted, to what Michelle got going there. And so one of the handouts that we've included is it's a somewhat genericized version of the initial proposal for DeKalb County. It's fleshed out some areas, it's deleted some others, but if anyone's interested in seeing the sort of Spayathon plus high quality, high volume spay neuter training budget proposal that we provided there, and feel free to take it, use it, adapt it in any way. We need no credit. What we want is for these things to move along. I think that every jurisdiction that every at least medium to large jurisdiction, it would be awesome if they were doing something like this. The little ones, there are some problems with, there's economies of scale at some level, but we're really hopeful that other jurisdictions, and we've talked to people in Alabama and a couple other places as well about the possibility of having similar packages funded by local government, and sort of with a lot of the legwork being done by volunteers and local groups.
And I think, to speak also to what you're talking about, ripple effects, Bree, is that that we don't have to all keep reinventing the wheel. So when you establish a precedence, whether it's a local ordinance or a new program, that's where the ripple effect starts then. And what Lisa's talking about, sharing and collaborating that information. And so you get enough local ordinances passed, you have more ammunition at the state level. And there's always ripple effects as you broaden your network and establish relationships. And I think what was said earlier today about getting along between organizations, between advocates, between different viewpoints is so important.
And just to give my perspective on the work that y'all are doing, is because we worked our first wet lab together, and I think from that very first wet lab, I think it was even like the trainers themselves, Dr. Ellard, I think, invited another vet that she knew to come in and observe. And then that vet has since reached out to me, and we're working on hosting a wet lab for that, or we have, I'm sorry, there's been a number, but like we brought people in, let them shadow, let them watch, let them see the process in motion. And you guys have set the precedent. You've been the model, you've been the example. We've let folks see how that works, and now we're having conversations with them. And then the good word got out, and now we're going to be hosting 2 other trainings with clinics in Georgia coming up here real soon. We have a training at Planned Pethood scheduled for, I think that's in December. And then we're going to have another training at the West Georgia Spay Neuter Clinic in January, I think is our date for that. And so, that's all attributed to you. And like you guys, you said, we're going to do it, we're going to make it happen. And you found out how, and then everyone else is going, what are they doing? What are they doing over there? We could do that too. And then a lot of that is to you guys inviting other folks to the table. It's to Lisa and Peggy having conversations with more people, and then introducing them to me, and then looping in United Spay Alliance, right? Because we all have our different parts to play and how we can plug in and support one another. And so again, just you never know what that ripple effect is going to be. And so we got 2 more trainings in Georgia, plus the work that's ongoing in DeKalb, which we're super excited to see and be a part of. So I think if we have any more questions for these lovely folks, you see their contact information on your screen. I am so, so grateful to all of you. I know we are over time, but I thank you for hanging around and sticking with us. I love all the work that you guys have done. I love that a United Spay Alliance has been a part of it, and that we've been able to share this. So hopefully folks have found this to be useful, because if we could only get this going in every state and every county, that would be something. So I am going to transition into some wrap up kind of notes as we head into our end of day. Again, I want to thank everyone for sticking around and sticking through with us.